So hello and welcome to episode 13 of the I Know About Sports podcast. I am, of course, Noah Arnold, pretty under the weather these last few days. It is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. Just registered for classes and that was a mess. Today we're going to be doing just kind of a recap of the week 11 of the college football season so far. And at the end, I'll probably also give my current top 5 sports movies of all time. Just because I figured I'm kind of just recapping a lot of stuff that at least most people listening probably already know. So, maybe give it a little something fresh. Maybe I'll start doing this Tuesday, have like a list of something. I don't know. This week I decided sports movies because in sports broadcasting class, they just randomly threw up favorite sports movie of all time, and that got my mind thinking, what's my own personal list? I've never even thought about my own list. So I went through that and have a list, not definitive list, but I have that. To kick off, week 11, I went 7-3, so pretty solid. My season total is now 79-38 in college football predictions. It's not terrible. I feel like it could be a little better. I've had a couple really bad weeks, but last week was pretty solid. For Clemson, because I like to talk about Clemson and Carolina. First half against Virginia Tech was one of the worst first halves of football I've ever watched on either side of the ball. It was just completely almost unwatchable. It was so bad on both sides. Clemson, the only touchdown was on a blocked field goal that everybody knew was going to be blocked because Clemson cannot protect their field goals from being blocked, which led to a Virginia Tech touchdown. But second half, Kate Clement came out on fire. Clemson offense came out on fire, and it won this game 24-14 pretty easily as Virginia Tech got a late touchdown to make it look a little better. Now, after Miami lost to Georgia Tech, got upset, Clemson now has a potential chance to get to Charlotte to play for the ACC championship game, which will give them a shot at the playoffs. All they have to do is beat Pitt and hope and pray Miami loses one more game this season. That is Clemson's only path to the playoffs. Or you could have SMU lose 2 games, but that's very unlikely. So just have to hope Miami loses 2 more games this year, or 1 more game this year. For Clemson to maybe even make the playoffs again. After the Louisville loss, who would have thought that? Who would have thunk it? South Carolina, ugly rain game. The weather was terrible, but the play on the field was pretty good. Carolina just pretty comfortably rushed and ground and pound their way to a win in this sludge that was Nashville, Tennessee. Vanderbilt couldn't do much. They were heavily outmatched on the line of scrimmage, and Carolina just ran it right down their throats. They gave Diego Pavia multiple hits. He had to come out a couple times this game, Vanderbilt quarterback, because he got drilled a couple times. And so, Carolina comfortably got the win there over a good Vanderbilt team. And when the playoff polls come out here in a few hours, they should be ranked. Gamecock should be ranked. Despite the weather, at least people that I know who went to the game, went to Nashville, despite the weather, seemingly had a great time. Nashville's a nice little party town. I don't call it Nash Vegas for nothing, I guess. Moving on to the playoff eliminator round of the section where I talk about teams that are on the bubble, may get eliminated from the playoffs. We're going to start at the top. Ole Miss survived something I did not think was going to happen, but they survived a sludge game, another rain game against Georgia. It was ugly. It was wet. It was muddy. But backs against the wall, they beat the Dogs handedly. They were in full control of this game from start to finish. Even prematurely stormed the field, which is pretty funny. Next 2 games for the Rebels, they go to a sub-500 Florida team in Gainesville, and they play the Egg Bowl against the worst team in the SEC right now, Mississippi State. Two should win games for Ole Miss, should be layup games for the Rebels. And if they win those 2 games, they're in. And they have a shot to make it to Atlanta to play for the SEC title game, but they don't even need to win the SEC title. They will be in if they win the next 2 games. So, yeah, Ole Miss seemingly might have just punched their ticket to the playoffs with that win over Georgia. And now, for Georgia, it puts them on the bubble now, because if they don't beat a top 10 Tennessee team at home this week, which they are favored by 8.5 points at the moment, and they're going to play a red-hot Georgia Tech team the week after that, they're out. Now, granted, it looks like seemingly Georgia will not be in the SEC championship game, but if they win the next 2 games, which are 2 pretty good opponents, they should be in the playoffs. And so, yeah, it looks like Georgia, they have to be perfect remainder. So they are now officially on the bubble. The bubble's starting to be, some bubbles starting to be popped, and maybe even new bubbles are starting to be formed now as teams start to lose and get put on that bubble slate. Speaking of the bubble slate, it was the elimination game, the bubble game in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. LSU, Alabama, losers out of the playoffs. And Alabama came in this game, underdogs. Everybody was picking against them. I picked against them at night in Baton Rouge, and they completely shit-wrecked LSU in a way I have never seen before. From the get-go, it was just run right up LSU's throat. There was nothing they can do about it. This was, in terms of LSU losses, home losses, and just LSU loss in general, this is the worst loss I've ever seen that program take. This is one of the worst losses I've ever seen any team take, with the expectations on this game, with what was at stake, with the atmosphere, being at home, night, hyped up, off a bye week, 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and that was what happened. Jalen Milroe just propelled himself into the playoffs with that. 185 yards and 4 touchdowns with his legs alone. He just ran through this LSU defense, which, one of the things in this game, LSU has had a terrible run defense, especially against quarterbacks. We saw that against Carolina. We saw that against A&M. The question was, could Alabama has not been a great running team this year. Could they run the ball consistently? They did against the LSU team, and it was just murder. From start of the fourth quarter, I have not seen Tiger Stadium that empty during a game since the pandemic. The only other time I saw the stadium that empty while the football game was happening was the pandemic. This LSU's not just out of the playoffs. This is a potential shattering loss for Brian Kelly, who I'm not a huge fan of. There's a lot of people out there not big fans of Brian Kelly, and a loss like this, 42-13. It was 42-6 before LSU got a late touchdown. At home with the playoffs on the line, just an awful performance for the Tigers. So yeah, LSU's out. Bama remains in, and Bama's next 2. Let me look real quick. Actually, Alabama's football schedule. I think their next 2 games are Mercer and I want to say Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Okay, yeah, never mind. They have 3 games left: Mercer, Oklahoma, Auburn. Alabama's going to be favored heavily in those ones. There's no excuse for them to lose any of those games. So yeah, Alabama, if they win out, they're in the SEC championship game, and they're for sure in the playoffs. Who would have thought that a couple weeks ago? It's a complete turnaround from where they were after not just the Vandy game, but after the Tennessee game, after the Carolina game, where they just looked bad. But yeah, Alabama looks like they're going to be going to the playoffs this year unless they slip up to and they blow a 20-point favorite. I don't know. That would be crazy. They're going to be favored by at least 22 points at least in those next 3 games. Moving on to the Big 12. They have so much stuff going on in the Big 12. Honestly, everybody's on the bubble, but the same part, nobody's really getting popped. Iowa State lost again this week to a really bad Kansas team, where they were just dominated from the get-go. Back-to-back losses now for the Cyclones. Their odds of win the Big 12 are not impossible. They can still win out easily and still go to the Big 12 championship. But it just looks really bad for the Cyclones. Granted, it's a slim but not impossible odds to make it. They are just on the hottest of seats right now. And something I was thinking of is, let's say Army, right? The Army Black Knights beats Notre Dame next weekend. They win the AAC championship. They're undefeated, an undefeated Army team versus a 2-loss Iowa State team. Their 2 losses were at home to Texas Tech, what could be a 6-6, 7-5 Texas Tech team. And their other loss was a game against Kansas where they got beat down, maybe 4-8 Kansas team. Who goes to the playoffs between that, an undefeated Army or 2-loss Big 12 champion? I don't know. That's a crazy argument that we could have, but I don't know. We'll see. Speaking of Army, of course, they're also on that playoff bubble. They went into Denton, Texas to play the Mean Green, and they won a slugger 14-3. Second straight week, Army's just gotten a ugly, low-scoring game. They held their opponent to 3 points. Hey, but win's a win, no matter how you get them. This game saw Army have the drive of the year for any team in college football. A 21-play, 94-yard drive that let the 13 seconds off the clock, almost 14 minutes off the clock. No, 13 seconds. 13 minutes, 54 seconds off the clock, and a touchdown to go up by 11 points in the mid-third quarter, heading into the fourth quarter. Best drive all week for any team in the country. Just incredible. Army with just basically ran the clock. That's what you do in the video game when you're up by a lot in the second half. You don't do this in real life. And Army did it. Army improves to 9-0 on the season. They head into a bye week where they travel to Notre Dame next Saturday. That's quickly become one of the most intriguing games of this college football season. Army and Notre Dame. Who would have thought that in week 1? Who would have thought that after Notre Dame lost to NIU in week 2? Who would have? This has been one of the best seasons in the history of college football, and I can't wait for the playoffs. This is going to be, I think, the best season of all time. But we had to eliminate somebody this week, and it looks like it's Pitt. They had very slim odds to begin with after getting blown out for SMU. They had very, very slim odds. And then they go in at home against a 4-loss Virginia team, and they lose at home. So that knocks them out of ACC championship contention, let alone playoff contention. And so Pitt is out. They can't win the conference title. They can't make the playoffs in that large period because they're just not, their resume is just not good enough. So yeah, we can say goodbye to Pitt's playoff chances officially as they lost to Virginia. Moving on to Group of 5 now. Tulane dominated Temple 52-6. Their in-state counterpart Louisiana won 55-19 over Arkansas State. Scores speak for themselves. These teams keep winning. They keep their very slim chances alive as we now head into Week 12. So, yeah, the state of Louisiana is still alive. For if you're not an LSU fan, you can still root for Tulane and the Raging Cajun of Lafayette to represent your state. Saturday night, Boise State squeaked by 28-21 over Nevada at home. A lot closer than most expected, and I expected. But Ashton Jeanty, the Heisman contender, dragged his team beyond the line. 209 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. He dragged this team across the line. But yeah, speaking of the Heisman races, Ashton Jeanty has been my guy for last month. But now it's a 1A, 1B situation. I have Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty in the kind of same tier. I kind of lean more towards Hunter because I think he just does more for his team, obviously, because he plays both offense and defense. Especially after last week, the 41-27 win in Lubbock, he had 9 catches for 99 yards and a touchdown, and he played 85 snaps on defense. He played a total of 161 plays on both sides. Just ludicrous what he's doing with the Buffaloes. And Hunter's been doing this all year for what's been the biggest turnaround, one of the biggest turnarounds in college football history. And now he has the Buffaloes of Colorado, second place in the Big 12. If they win out, they're going to Dallas to play for the Big 12 championship for a spot in the college football playoffs. Hunter is not only one of the best receivers, he's one of the best defensive players as well. Nobody is doing that, and that's why Hunter has now moved into my top spot over Ashton Jeanty, despite the fact that Jeanty's putting up Barry Sanders-like numbers. Just absurd. The guy's playing 160 plays. That's just unheard of. So, yeah, those two guys are in a league of their own. In my opinion, I will not listen to somebody if they don't have those two guys in their top 2 in some order, Jeanty and Hunter. But, yeah, my number 3 is Cam Ward. Even before the week, I had Cam Ward at a solid 3rd place. Despite the loss, he stays at 3rd place for me. He still put up 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, despite Miami losing to Georgia Tech. I still think Cam Ward is the best quarterback in the country. He's been sensational all year. He has been the catalyst for Miami's success. He's so clutch throughout the year. So many clutch moments, performances. And you see the QB play Miami's had over the last 20, 25 years. They haven't had anybody like Cam Ward. When I think of the Heisman, I think of any kind of MVP award, which the Heisman is, who is the most valuable player? I think Cam Ward is the most valuable player in the ACC. I think Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, Cam Ward are the 3 most valuable players to their teams in college football, which is why I have Cam Ward, who leads the country in both passing yards and touchdowns, as my 3rd for the Heisman at the moment. Yeah, and so that moves down to number 4. Number 4 for me is currently Dillon Gabriel, quarterback for Oregon. Some outlets have him as the winner, which I think is downright idiotic and stupid. The odds have him number 2, which I also disagree with the odds as well. I know he's a starting QB for the number 1 team in the country, but he hasn't been spectacular. He hasn't had any historic performances. He hasn't been historic, as some of the other guys in front of him have. Granted, I think he's been extremely consistent. Consistently good. Actually, not consistently good. Consistently great. He's been consistently a great quarterback this season for the number 1 team in the country. But he's not putting up anything otherworldly or nothing, so I'll put him at number 4 at the moment. Granted, I think if he had something like this last year, I think he would have won it last year. Last year was a not great Heisman race. This year is one of the best. This year is one of the best races. Last year, probably one of the worst. But yeah, moving now to kind of the number 5, and everybody below here is honestly an honorable mention. In my opinion, the tiers, everybody only talks about the top 4. But in my opinion, it's a tier system. It goes the top 2, Hunter, Jeanty. Cam Ward is in that tier by himself below them. Then it's Dillon Gabriel, and then it's everybody else. So everybody from here on is kind of honorable mention. For 5th, I have Shedeur Sanders, quarterback Colorado. Outside of the Nebraska game, he's been incredible. Second biggest star and one of the biggest turnarounds in college football history. Number 6, Indiana quarterback Curtis Rourke. Another guy leading one of the greatest turnarounds in the history of college football. Indiana has been the story of college football this year, sitting at 10-0. The Hoosiers look to potentially go to the playoffs. Number 7, Jalen Milroe, quarterback Alabama. We talked about him. He has just propelled himself into these talks with games like LSU. I don't think it'll be he doesn't have any other huge games left. So Milroe will probably not be a Heisman finalist because you're not going to get a lot of looks at you for beating up on Mercer, Oklahoma, this 2024 version of Oklahoma, and Auburn. You're not really going to get a lot of looks at that. But I think Milroe deserves to at least get a shout-out. A guy I'm surprised not on anybody's Heisman top 10 list is Tennessee running back Dylan Sampson. He has ran for over 100 yards in every single game. He is top 5 of the country rushing yards, has 20 touchdowns, and is carrying this team to a top 10 spot and potentially go to the SEC championship game. So that's why I have Dylan Sampson number 8. Honestly, I thought about ranking him even higher. But I think these other guys play more valuable position in quarterback and are also just as valuable for their teams. But I think Sampson he is the Tennessee offense at the moment. Number 9, Clemson quarterback Cade Klubnik, who slid down after the last 2 weeks, despite his second half against Virginia Tech, which was pretty good. He slides down the list. And rounding out the top 10 is Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart. Finally got that big win on Saturday that he's been looking for throughout his college career as Ole Miss pulled off the win against Georgia. But I don't think he can go much further than 9 or 8, honestly. Especially with sorry. As I've been a little down all week. Especially with Ole Miss's remaining schedule not looking the best that he could have another big game. And I said I was going to talk about, kind of give a rankings because I said everything that I've talked about is stuff that's already happened. So, I don't know, maybe give an opinion or two. I'm going to give kind of a short top 5 sports movies of all time. You can give your own list. I will happily listen to anybody's list. But yeah, this is just my personal top 5. I'm kind of ranking it based on how much I enjoy them and how good of a movie I think it is. Number 1 is Rocky 3. And by the way, the top 3, maybe even 4 could be Rocky movies, but I'm only going to rank one of them. Okay? So just note, Rocky 1, 2, and 3 are my top 3. Those are all of my top 3, but I'm only going to rank one of them. And I'm going to rank Rocky 3, the one that not a lot of people surprisingly rank as high. I know everybody loves the first one. And then the second one is some people like it even more. Most people like Rocky 2 more than Rocky 1, just because that's the one where he finally wins the championship, finally wins the title. But Rocky 3 is my favorite because he takes that underdog, and now he's the top guy. He gets very overconfident, and then he just gets punched in the mouth by another young, hungry up-and-comer. And he has to completely rebuild not only himself, but his confidence. And I just think the bond in this movie is so good. I think this is actually, I think Sylvester Stallone's best acting performance, in all honesty, was in this movie, specifically the second half of this movie, where he's training and trying to get himself back up to the top to beat Clubber Lang, who I always just call Mr. T. Most of the time, I only talk, it's a big name actor. I'll only call them by the actor name. So, just how it goes. Number 2 is going to be another combat sports movie. It is The Wrestler, starring Mickey Rourke, 2008 movie. You're going to see in my top 5, it is a pretty grim top 5. But I think this is the most honest depiction of kind of that old school wrestling mentality. And I just adore this movie, the story behind this movie. Because I think this is just such a kind of hard, harsh, and yet honestly honest depiction of the old school style of professional wrestling. And I'm not going to spoil anything about any of these movies, but yeah, it is a tough one. And the reason I won't give any spoilers for some of these movies is because, surprisingly, a lot of people in the class didn't see some of these movies that I brought up. So I didn't want to spoil it for them. So maybe you haven't seen some of these movies and you want to watch them and I won't spoil them for you either. The Wrestler is one that I highly recommend. I don't know where you can find it. Let me actually look that up. Where can you... Can you watch the Wrestler movie? You can... Oh, yeah, you can only pay for it. Well, you can probably find it somewhere. Unless you want to pay $4 on Amazon Prime. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. Yeah, sure, okay. Yeah, number 3, another heartbreaking style of movie is $1 Million Baby, starring Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank, and Morgan Freeman. This is honestly kind of like Rocky in a sense, but it's a lot more gritty and realistic rather than like inspirational, if you will. Of course, it follows Clint Eastwood as like this old boxing coach who's trying to redeem himself by training an up-and-comer. And it also tackles the issue of sexism pretty well, as he doesn't really want to train a girl, much less a kind of an older woman. And in the end, it switches. He kind of becomes more like this father figure and trains this amateur boxer. I think she was a waitress to start the movie, into a legit professional. And I will not spoil this movie, but yeah, it's a rough one to watch. Number 4, not a rough one to watch, is The Karate Kid. Yeah, I can't have a completely grim top 5. So I brought up The Karate Kid. I saw a review of this movie and I was trying to research just to put more movies in my head, so that's why it's not just off the cusp. This movie was not ranked that high, and I saw the reason for a lot of them is it's kind of a predictable story with not a lot of twists and turns, which honestly I think really works for this movie. It is just a classic kid gets bullied and he happens to fall into this weird, wacky world of karate. It happens to get trained up by this weird, wacky karate instructor, has these weird teachings, and that ends up making him the coolest guy ever. Just a very classic, very easy to understand story that you can honestly watch a million times. You never get bored of it. Number 5, rounding out the top 5, is the most recent one on this. And I'm looking, this might be this movie and The Wrestler, the only 2 movies that come out in the last 20 years. This is the only movie that come out in the 2020s. And it is Iron Claw, released late last year, 2023, starring Zac Efron, and another big co-star is Jeremy Allen White, as you may know from The Bear. I've talked about with The Wrestler. This is a biopic of the very legendary Von Erich family. They were a very famous wrestling family way back in the 70s to about late 80s, early 90s. It's about that family dynasty of wrestlers. And I will not spoil it beyond that because, yeah, I'm just not going to spoil it beyond that. It has to deal with heavily about not just family, but brotherhood, and more about I think the biggest theme of this movie is family legacies, if you will, and brotherhood. But yeah, this movie, as I said, very heavily and kind of realistically as well, talked about a very real family, very real situations. And the only bad part about this movie, the only thing I did not like, and the only unrealistic part of this movie, was whoever the hell they had to play Ric Flair. He was not great. He was bad. Just outright bad. Whoever they got to play Ric Flair was terrible. But yeah, there's a lot of girls who I know personally who wanted to watch the movie because, Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, they're freaking wearing the tightest little tights you could ever wear, wrestling type tights, and Zac Efron actually got into shape for this movie. And they came out of this movie bawling their eyes out. And yeah, I won't spoil it beyond that, but yeah, just fantastic. And I think it's the best sports movie of the last 20 years outside of The Wrestler. Honorable mentions I had was Waterboy, not Friday Night Lights, Waterboy and Remember the Titans. Why can I not remember the Titans? Those are the two movies I had as honorable mention. Oh, and Longest Yard. Yeah, so 3 kind of football movies too. Yeah, 3 football movies didn't even make my top 5, and football is my favorite sport. But yeah, those are my top 5 sports movies, and they're all combat sports movies. Kind of weird, yeah. Ooh, I think a couple boxing, 2 wrestling, and then karate. So yeah, just never really thought about it till today. Never thought I'd give that list till today, but yeah, rounding it out, as I said, number 1 is Rocky 3, and just to reiterate, the first 2 Rocky movies would be the top 3 if I would pick them all. Number 2, The Wrestler. Number 3, $1 Million Baby. Number 4, Karate Kid. And number 5, Iron Claw. So thank you for this episode. We'll be back Thursday for predictions. And as ever, stay safe. Love yourself. Don't go around making weird, vague threats to people, okay? Don't let people get you down, all right? And just love each other, okay, guys? Don't get too obsessed over one person or another. And anybody wants to have me list my top 5 or top 3, top 10, anything, I will gladly oblige. I'll gladly oblige, okay? There's an infinite topics that I could talk about, and I feel like this is just an easy way to ease into it. So it doesn't have to be sports related. It could be genuinely anything, ranking whatever, and I would do it. So yeah, thank you all. I wanted to hit 30 minutes exact, but my ramblings got me to 32 and a half. So thank you, and goodbye.